Hello and welcome to Have a Chat with Matt podcast series.
Hi guys and welcome back to MDTV podcasts. Today we're going to talk about grief, how it affected me. We're going to talk about the process of grief, the grief cycle. But for me it's a warm welcome. You've obviously come to this podcast to seek some guidance around grief, try to understand more of it, and for whatever situation brings you to this podcast. Just sorry from me personally. Losing anyone is hard, not just through death. And that's the importance of this podcast, because grief is associated with death all the time, and actually it doesn't just have to be death. It can be a breakup, it can be a divorce, it can be losing a friend, it can be losing a job, and sometimes it can even be losing yourself. That's a massive part of people's lives which people forget about. Losing yourself and what your morals and values are is a huge loss, and understanding how to get them back is really important. So this podcast is going to cover the grief cycle, the stages of the grief cycle, and my personal grief story. I just want to say also that the pain that you're experiencing right here, right now, however hard it may seem to think, it will go away. It will settle. This chaos, the raw emotion will all calm down. We'll never completely go away. We change once we go through the grief journey. We do change. We see life differently. We experience life differently. But that raw chaos that you may be experiencing, it will settle. So the grief cycle is made up of 5 stages. Now these stages are not linear stages, okay? So you don't complete one and move on to the next. You don't, it's not a process as simple as that. The grief cycle is something that can go back and forth. So if you think of a ribbon that's up in the air blowing in the wind, you are just on that ribbon. The 5 stages, the first is shock and denial. The second one is anger. The third is depression and detachment. The fourth is bargaining. And the final stage is acceptance. And like I say, you can be at depression and detachment, move on to bargaining, and then a trigger might come along, and you'll go back to anger, or you go back to shock and denial. And those triggers consist of stuff like memories, smells, songs, bits of clothing, photos, whatever it may be. It can send us back. So let's talk about shock and denial. Now, in my story, this is probably the hardest stage for myself. And this is where it comes to the first time hearing in the news that your loved one has passed away. Or it might be hearing the first time that your relationship's breaking down, or that your partner doesn't want to be with you anymore, or some real impactful news that has kind of hit you. It's that raw emotion and the shock. So when I was first told that my dad had died via my mum phoning me, she said that dad had passed away. And I think I must have said, "What do you mean?" about 7 to 8 times. I felt the world slow down, and that time had stood completely still. Everything kind of went into slow motion. It was really, really bizarre. In the shock stage, we can do many bizarre things. We may hear voices, see the deceased loved one, have a fear of entering certain places, such as their house or room. And the denial is attributed to this. We may suddenly think that they are back, try calling or texting them because we know we cannot accept that they have died. And this is very much the same for my dad. I remember, trying to text him or waiting for his phone calls, and he died at 54 due to a cardiac event. And that shock was, it kind of takes over you of that. You can just shut down. You just shut down of your normal function. And it can be a scary place to be. I had it quite a few times where one minute I was okay, and the next I was kind of on the floor, hyperventilating, absolutely sobbing. It was a really, really hard place to be, and that was 3 years ago. And so the journey for me has been a long one, but here I am now, hopefully helping everybody to understand. And it's such a natural thing to go through if and when it does happen, because unfortunately it's inevitable. We are going to lose our parents, we are going to lose loved ones, friends aren't going to be forever, relationships may not be forever. So, something to understand as well. The second stage is anger. It can be quite a scary one. This is because we can lose sense of ourselves. Things that never annoyed us before can become incredibly irritating. So, people always asking, "Oh, are you okay?" Or people paying extra attention to you. And what they don't see is you're coping. This is a natural response to grief. People expect you to be exactly the same as you were, the day before that person passing away. And it's not going to happen. It can be years, it can be months, it can be weeks and days before you may even start to behave in the way that people know you. You might not want to talk to anybody anymore. You might suddenly become frustrated at things that never upset you in the past. We also become angry at the fact that this has happened to us. We start asking, is there anything we could have done differently? If I'd been there earlier, if I had phoned earlier, we go into this self-blame, self-destruct. And this can happen across a family. So with my dad, it was kind of my mum who felt this, of why did I let him go into hospital? And that rationale is completely backwards, because he was unwell. We thought he had appendicitis, so he needed to go to hospital. And many events and many tragedies happen when we have no control over them, such as car crashes or murders, and we lose people in that horrific way. And that anger comes from not being able to get closure. With a fatal road traffic collision, especially with young adults passing away, their mum and father, they're never going to be able to get the answers that they want. They never got to say goodbye. They never got to understand the eventuality of that child dying, and that journey will be with them for life. Then that's something you can never kind of get closure upon. And the next one is depression and detachment, and this usually comes further down the line of the grief journey. After all the raw chaos and the sobbing and the breaking down, which again, it may be a few weeks, it may be months, it may be years, this is your journey. And that's important to remember, is that every grief journey is personal to you, is personal to the person that is going through it. No one can tell you how to grieve. No one can tell you should be feeling better by now. No one can say, oh, you should be forgetting about it, or you should be moving on. Never ever listen to people when it comes to grieving. This is your journey. This is your time to process and understand what's going on. But we can become depressed because unfortunately we've lost someone. And if that person is close to you, we've become, if it's a relationship or death, we can become lonely. If that's your only partner, or if it's your only parent or your only child, and it's suddenly ripped out of your life, whether through death or breakup, whatever it may be, you're now lonely. You've lost that normality of having somebody with you. With tragedy comes sadness. Some tragic events, road traffic collisions and murders and terrorist incidents and awful, awful places to be. War. all of these people that have lost their lives, they've got families. They've got people at home that were expecting them, and they will never understand why or where that person has gone. That leads us to become unmotivated, and we go into a hibernation mode. So we go into the sort of view of, well, if they're not in my life, I don't want to live anymore. And that's a difficult place to come out of, but a completely natural one. Our normal function has been taken away. We don't want to live the life. We always feel guilty, I guess, when it comes to that. We don't want to carry on with life because they can't. The next stage is bargaining. So when we're in pain, it's sometimes hard to accept that there's nothing that we could have done to change the situation. So bargaining is when we start to make deals with ourselves. We start saying to ourselves, well, if they hadn't have gone, I wouldn't be living like this. Or if I could have done this, then this wouldn't have happened. This comes later in the grieving cycle, and it's a form of recovery. We're fighting that inner balance of accepting that this has happened and still not wanting to believe that this has happened. So we bargain with ourselves. If this could be one thing, how would the other have changed? You can have healthy bargaining, so we can say, you know what, I really miss that person, but I need, life carries on. I need to move on with my life. And the final stage is acceptance. And this is a combination of many different aspects. One being reflection, self-love, and kindness. We will never get over the loss, but over time we do learn to live without that person. And that comes with time. So if you imagine a box, a cardboard box with a big ball inside of it. When we are first hit with grief, the ball represents the grief, the chaos, the raw emotion, the pain, everything that's going through it. Over time, that ball deflates and slightly becomes less and less, the more of the self-reflection, the self-love, the meditation, the mindfulness that we do. And there will still be times when the ball hits the side of the cardboard box. But at the beginning, that ball's so big that all it's doing is hitting the sides of the cardboard box. But over time, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until we have those triggers, the birthdays, the Christmases, the smells, the photos. And suddenly the box is thrown about and the ball is hitting the sides. And it takes us back to that time. And as I said before, the grief journey is a free-flowing process. Each day can be very different. Sometimes we think we've got it all figured out, and in fact we haven't, so please be gentle with yourself. And here are my top tips on how to manage grief. Communication is number one. Everybody that has gone through grief, no matter what the circumstances, death, relationships, whatever, you have your story. And the best way to process and understand your story is to tell people. Tell people that you trust and love. And be vulnerable. Be brave enough to be vulnerable. Because in that place is where we find calm. When we're vulnerable enough to show our emotions, we find calm. And in that close network of people, you'll be surprised at how many others are feeling the same way. And remember that you will be grieving something different, especially in such as a family setting or even a relationship setting, right? You're grieving a girlfriend, your close friends will also grieve a friend. Your girlfriend's mum and dad will grieve you, the loss of a potential stepson and all the potential to have a son-in-law and all the children that would have come with it, or whatever life would have looked like. That's the grieving cycle. The ability to feel can be distorted when going through grief, and that's only natural. Sometimes we don't know how to feel. Sometimes we don't want to. But just each day, taking it each day as it comes, and allowing yourself to feel, whatever that may be. Try not to shut off from your emotions. Or, if you've never been an emotional person, get in touch with yourself. Start thinking inside your own thought processes and in your own mind. And really asking yourself, how am I feeling about all of this? Exercise is another great one. When I lost my dad, I was in a bad place for quite a few months, and then I found running and fitness really helped my mental health in terms of, it's almost a distraction. It's taking you out of that place that's causing so much pain. Something different. It's giving you that boost to go for it. And I think as much as physical exercise helps you stay healthy, it also really helps with your mental health. Getting that fresh air, getting out and seeing the world, visualizing that the world still goes on. It must go on, and you must go on, because you never know what tomorrow will bring. And sometimes it's okay if the only thing you did that day was breathe. If it caused that much pain and you wanted to stay in bed, that's absolutely fine. So I hope you found this podcast and guidance comforting and supportive. And please know that it does come from a place of love, experience, and someone that's gone through a grief journey with multiple elements to it. I'm from a family of 5 children, so us losing our dad was difficult for everybody, because it wasn't just me grieving, and it was a place that I couldn't really escape the sadness, the pure raw emotions. But over time, we have figured it out through constantly talking about it, through therapy, through becoming stronger as a family unit, which has been lovely. Finally, I just want to leave a little message with you. We will never be without the person we lost, as they created the lives that we get to live on. Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. It is simply the price you pay for love. Now, guys, if you've enjoyed the podcast, please head over to my Instagram page, which is MDTB Life Coaching. On there is full of poems, stories, mental health resources, aid memoirs, and I'm going to be doing some more creations very soon of self-help guides. But this grief guide is downloadable. It's named The Thief Called Grief, written by myself, and you can download it as PDF, or however you want to view it. You can just view it on your phone if you want to. But thank you for listening, and if you guys need that extra support, please email me at mdtblifecoach@gmail.com. Have a lovely day, and thank you for listening.